I watched my own family fall apart over money that hadn't even been distributed yet. Brothers who grew up sharing everything suddenly couldn't be in the same room. Sisters who used to call each other daily stopped speaking entirely. And the saddest part? The inheritance they were fighting over wasn't even that substantial. This isn't just my story. It's happening in families everywhere, right now, as you watch this. According to recent studies, over 60% of families experience serious conflict during inheritance discussions. Some of these relationships never recover. But here's what nobody tells you about these fights. They're rarely about the money itself. There's something much deeper going on, and understanding it might just save your family from the same fate. Let me take you back to where this pattern really begins. Most sibling inheritance conflicts don't start when a parent passes away. They start decades earlier, in childhood, with small moments of perceived unfairness that pile up over time. One child feels they were always the favorite. Another remembers sacrificing their dreams to care for aging parents while siblings lived their lives freely. Someone else recalls being criticized more harshly or praised less often. These old wounds sit dormant for years, waiting for the perfect trigger. Then comes the inheritance discussion, and suddenly it's not about dividing assets fairly. It's about settling scores. It's about finally being seen as equal. It's about proving your worth to parents who can no longer validate you. The money becomes a symbol of love, approval, and recognition. When one sibling gets more, the others don't just feel cheated financially. They feel rejected emotionally. They feel like the family hierarchy they resented their whole lives has been carved in stone forever. Now let's talk about the specific traits that show up when siblings enter this destructive pattern. The first and most common trait is what I call selective memory syndrome. Each sibling remembers the family history completely differently. One sibling remembers being neglected while another was showered with attention. That other sibling remembers feeling pressured to succeed while their brother got away with everything. A third sibling remembers both of them getting more freedom while they were held to impossible standards. They're all remembering the same childhood, but through completely different lenses. This selective memory becomes ammunition. Every conversation turns into a competition over who suffered more or contributed more. Who visited mom more often in her final years. Who paid for dad's medical expenses? Who gave up career opportunities to stay close to home? The second trait is scorekeeping mentality. These siblings start tracking every perceived slight and every imagined advantage. They keep mental spreadsheets of who got what and when. They calculate the value of every gift, every loan, every moment of parental attention from decades ago. I've seen siblings create actual spreadsheets listing every financial transaction their parents ever made with each child. They'll remember a $500 loan from 1987 and demand it be deducted from their brother's inheritance share. They'll calculate the estimated value of free babysitting they provided and present it as a debt the estate owes them. This scorekeeping reveals something tragic. These people have been keeping score their entire lives. The inheritance just gave them a reason to finally present their calculations. They've been feeling shortchanged for years, maybe decades, and now they have a chance to balance the scales. The third trait is communication breakdown. Siblings who are fighting over inheritance stop talking directly to each other. Instead, they communicate through lawyers, through other family members, or through hostile emails sent late at night when emotions run highest. They stop listening to understand and start listening to find ammunition. Every conversation becomes a legal deposition rather than a family discussion. They record phone calls. They save text messages as evidence. They interpret every word in the worst possible light. This communication breakdown creates a vicious cycle. The less they talk, the more they assume. The more they assume, the worse their assumptions become. Soon they're not fighting real people anymore. They're fighting the villains they've created in their minds. The fourth trait is the entitlement paradox. Here's what's fascinating. Every sibling in these fights believes they deserve more while simultaneously believing they're being reasonable and the others are being greedy. The sibling who spent every weekend caring for elderly parents feels entitled to a larger share for their sacrifice. The sibling who became financially successful feels entitled to less scrutiny because they don't need the money as much. The sibling who struggled financially feels entitled to more help because they need it most. Each perspective makes sense from inside that person's experience. But they're fundamentally incompatible. Someone who sacrificed career opportunities to provide care did make a real sacrifice. Someone who achieved financial success despite no inheritance advance did work hard. Someone facing financial hardship does have real needs. The problem isn't that these perspectives are wrong. The problem is that each sibling can only see their own perspective and judges everyone else's as selfish. The fifth trait is what psychologists call triangulation. This is when siblings stop dealing with each other directly and instead try to recruit allies. They call other family members to complain and gain support. They tell their version of events to anyone who will listen. They try to turn cousins, aunts, uncles, and even their own children against their siblings. Triangulation is incredibly destructive because it expands the conflict beyond the immediate family. It creates factions and camps. It forces people to choose sides. Family gatherings become awkward or impossible. Weddings and funerals turn into battlegrounds. I've seen families where cousins who grew up together no longer speak because their parents recruited them into inheritance wars. I've watched grandchildren lose relationships with aunts and uncles they loved because they were taught to see them as enemies. The sixth trait is the all-or-nothing mentality. Once siblings enter serious conflict over inheritance, they often become incapable of compromise. Every discussion becomes a zero-sum game where one person's gain is another's loss. They reject reasonable settlement offers because accepting anything less than total victory feels like admitting they were wrong. They spend thousands on legal fees fighting over hundreds of dollars in disputed assets. They sacrifice relationships worth infinitely more than any inheritance to avoid feeling like they lost. This all-or-nothing thinking reveals deep insecurity. These siblings are so afraid of being devalued that they'd rather destroy the family than accept a compromise that might imply they were less important. The seventh trait is historical revisionism. As the conflict intensifies, siblings begin rewriting family history to support their position. The brother who was actually quite difficult becomes remembered as a saint. The sister who was genuinely helpful becomes recast as manipulative. Parents who were complex human beings with both strengths and flaws become either perfect victims who were taken advantage of or terrible people who played favorites. The truth becomes whatever serves the current argument. This revisionism is partly unconscious. Our memories genuinely do shift to align with our current beliefs and emotions. But it's also partly strategic. Siblings know that controlling the narrative gives them power in the dispute. So how does faith fit into all of this? How can spiritual principles restore what greed and resentment have broken? Let me share what I've learned from both scripture and from watching families heal. First, faith reminds us that we are stewards, not owners. Everything we have, including inheritance, is ultimately a gift from God. This perspective immediately deflates the entitlement that fuels most inheritance conflicts. If it's all God's anyway, then fighting over who gets more becomes absurd. Second, faith calls us to forgiveness, which is the only way to break the cycle of scorekeeping. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending past hurts didn't happen. It means choosing to release the debt we feel others owe us. It means letting go of the need to settle scores. Jesus taught that we should forgive not 7 times but 70 times 7. In other words, forgiveness isn't a one-time event. It's a daily practice, especially in family relationships where old wounds easily reopen. Third, faith teaches us to value relationships over possessions. Jesus asked what it profits someone to gain the whole world but lose their soul. We could ask what it profits someone to win an inheritance dispute but lose their family. When we truly embrace faith's teaching that people matter more than things, inheritance disputes lose their power over us. We become willing to sacrifice financial gain to preserve relationships. We choose peace over vindication. Fourth, faith provides a framework for honest self-examination. The Bible encourages us to remove the plank from our own eye before pointing out the speck in someone else's eye. This is exactly what's needed in inheritance conflicts where everyone sees the other's faults clearly but remains blind to their own. Prayer and spiritual reflection can help us see our own contribution to family conflict. We can acknowledge our own selfishness, our own scorekeeping, our own failure to communicate with love. This self-awareness is the beginning of healing. Fifth, faith communities can provide mediation and perspective. A wise pastor, priest, or spiritual counselor can help families navigate inheritance disputes with both practical wisdom and spiritual guidance. They can ask the hard questions that need to be asked and speak truth that needs to be heard. I've seen families on the brink of permanent estrangement find healing through faith-based mediation. Not because the mediator imposed a solution, but because they created space for honest conversation grounded in shared values of love, forgiveness, and family unity. Sixth, faith offers hope for restoration even after terrible damage has been done. The Christian story is fundamentally about redemption and reconciliation. No relationship is too broken for God to heal if both parties are willing. I've witnessed siblings who hadn't spoken in years slowly rebuild their relationship through mutual commitment to faith principles. It wasn't quick or easy. It required humility, patience, and repeated choices to extend grace. But it was possible. Let me be clear about something important. Bringing faith into inheritance disputes doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean letting yourself be taken advantage of or accepting genuinely unfair treatment. Faith calls us to both justice and mercy. Sometimes the faithful response is to clearly state your needs and boundaries. Sometimes it's to insist on fair treatment while still extending forgiveness. Sometimes it's to accept less than you deserve for the sake of peace. Wisdom and prayer help us discern which response fits which situation. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. If you're currently in an inheritance dispute with siblings, you have a choice. You can continue down the path of conflict, scorekeeping, and broken relationships. Or you can choose a different way. You can acknowledge that this fight is probably about more than money. You can examine your own heart for the resentments and wounds driving your behavior. You can choose to communicate with humility and listen with genuine openness. You can decide that preserving your relationship with your siblings matters more than winning the dispute. You can extend forgiveness even if they don't deserve it, because you've been forgiven for things you didn't deserve either. And if you're not currently in this situation, learn from those who are. Have the hard conversations with your siblings now, while emotions aren't running high. Talk about old resentments before they become ammunition. Discuss inheritance expectations before someone passes away. Most importantly, invest in your sibling relationships now. Build connection and trust that can weather future storms. Create positive shared experiences that outweigh old grievances. Practice forgiveness and grace in small things so you're ready for big ones. Family is one of God's greatest gifts. Don't let money destroy what matters most. Choose faith over fear, forgiveness over resentment, and relationship over revenge. Your inheritance may be temporary, but your family can be forever if you're willing to fight for it in the right way.